Good afternoon. My name is Mark Sternberg, Director of the K-12 Education Program at the Walton Family Foundation. We're so glad you're joining us for a listening and thinking session about the future of education. It goes without saying that this conversation comes at a pivotal moment for the academic and social emotional well-being of America's youth. Today, you'll hear from thought leaders whose energy and ideas are influencing local and national policies and practices in our field. Speakers will touch on American aspirations, racial equity, economic mobility, the success of every student, aspirations that are of the utmost importance to the Walton Family Foundation and to all of us working in education. What we know is that our K-12 system still tolerates a significant opportunity gap. But now is not a moment for fixed mindsets about how to change that. What we at Walton have learned over the last 5 years, and from studying the impact of COVID-19, is that there can be no one answer that alone will lead to breakthrough change. We need to be even more focused on partnering with communities to help put every student on a path to upward economic and social mobility. We need diverse coalitions that reflect our commitment to meeting communities and families where they are and where they want to go. But we cannot move forward without acknowledging the gravity of the moment we are now in. 10 months and 400,000 lives lost into COVID-19. The pandemic has left America's education system shaken and in dire need. Since the pandemic's onset, learning loss, especially among our nation's highest risk students, has been profound. Studies estimate that students have lost months of learning in reading and math, with the greatest losses experienced by students of color. A bellwether analysis found that there are still 3 million students whom we have not heard from since April of 2020. And this won't just affect students now. Projections say future lifetime earnings have dropped by millions. Black and brown students are predicted to lose at least 50% more of their future earnings than their white peers. And finally, youth anxiety is at an all-time high. Experts predict an unprecedented surge in depression and suicide. Already, school districts and systems across the country are confronting this unthinkable crisis. Healing and hope and reimagining the future of education from here will take humility, it will take courage, and an openness to what the solutions can be. Instead of relying on old assumptions and habits, we need to be looking to communities on the front lines of improving education for children. 2021 must be the year that unleashes innovation through crisis. That community-demanded, community-driven, and community-led educational change is given the support it needs to flourish. It is my pleasure to now turn it over to Romy, Deputy Director of the K-12 Education Program at the Walton Family Foundation, to help us think through how.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Romy Drucker, and it's my privilege to serve as the Deputy Director of the K-12 Education Program at the Walton Family Foundation. While the pain and loss of this moment cannot be overstated, 2021 and the next 5 years present a remarkable moment for the entire education community to ramp up our efforts on behalf of students and families. But the path forward isn't going to be linear. It's going to require us to be courageous and bold, but also humble, to challenge our assumptions and forge unlikely alliances, to support creative, community-driven solutions that may look very different from ones we've tried before. Today's presentation features 6 diverse speakers with ideas about the future of education. We've chosen to have a series of quick talks to showcase a range of perspectives to help you reflect on the present and think differently about the challenge and opportunity before us. You'll hear about equitable systemic change, about coalitions of the future, about breakthrough innovation, and about what it will take to finally close the opportunity and mobility gaps faced by far too many students in America. We helped start this dialogue about the future of education last fall with our Schools In campaign, a celebration of the ingenuity and vision of schools, educators, and families who are doing whatever it takes to keep kids learning during the pandemic. If you hear something today that sparks your imagination, please share it on social media with the hashtag SchoolsIn or comment in the chat box. This has been a moment for listening, for forging common ground, and for building new partnerships that put families and communities at the center of all that we do. To that end, we recently convened a series of listening sessions with local leaders and youth from across the country. We're pleased to show you a short video with highlights from those conversations.
The pandemic, the social unrest, the recession has been, I think, revealing and eye-opening for some people, and just the same old, but worse for others. I guess if there's anything that I'm committed to professionally is having some more candid conversations around what the heck is going on in the state.
Families who have that lived experience and organizations that serve them, COVID didn't shine a light for them, it shined a light for system leaders. There's massive opportunity for change.
COVID has caused us to ask the question, if for the last 10 years, the needle hasn't moved the way we would like, how do we leverage all of our existing capacities, our existing resources, and identify ways to move them to a place that can be a part of the solution?
I really do think that there's a whole entire level of infrastructure that's missing in the ecosystem today. And that infrastructure that's missing is really developing the coalition building and the skill sets of community-based organizations.
So this is a good time, I think, for us to be innovative. None of us are really in the education space per se when you think about our policy. So we're here, we'll work with anyone on this call, and there's a great coalition of the willing right now that are putting together plans to make our families less vulnerable and thrive.
I think Gen Z does have the power of change. It's based upon whether or not we can take over the higher power in a sense, because as young adults, in a way, we have a lot more power than people would think.
Things that we've dealt with as a generation and things that we want to change for the better, for not ourselves, not for our children, maybe not even our grandchildren, but our grandchildren's children, so that we can make this better for them as well.
I found these conversations incredibly inspiring. We heard hope in the possibility of sustainable change, about the role of a new generation of leaders in sparking that change, and about the potential of bringing together diverse coalitions of problem solvers to tackle old challenges with new thinking. Our first speaker today is one of those change makers. Shalini Sharma is the co-founder and CEO of Zearn, a platform many educators and parents in the audience know well. Please welcome Shalini.
Good afternoon. My name is Shalini Sharma, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Zearn. Zearn Math is a nonprofit platform and curriculum. During the pandemic, we scaled up and now reach 6 million elementary school students. Billions of math problems have been completed on our platform during the pandemic. As a result, our platform offers lots of data and insights that can guide our response and recovery during these unprecedented times. I'm honored to be included in this important convening hosted by the Walton Family Foundation. In my talk, I'll share two things. First, I will share how Zern data can show us what has happened during the pandemic in real time. In the second part, I'll share what our data tells us we must do together to recover math learning. The first thing I'll point you to is the anonymized and aggregated data we stream out weekly from the Zern Math web application to the Opportunity Insights platform called Track the Recovery. You can see this data yourself at tracktherecovery.org. This data gives you a picture of weekly learning and learning loss by income and geography, down to the country level. Opportunity Insights, led by Brown and Harvard economists John Friedman and Raj Chetty, is the foremost economics research center in our country, helping us to understand and solve income mobility. To do this analysis, they took a nationally representative sample of consistently using Zern schools starting back in January 2020. The sample includes 800,000 Zern students. Track the Recovery has followed this sample in real time every week of the pandemic. Let's examine this chart together. The lines represent children's mastery-based math progress through their grade level work since January 1st. Each line shows students by income status. You can see the lines move together till March 16th. What is a little counterintuitive on this chart is that 0 is a good number. If you're at 0, that means you are doing what you did before the pandemic, and these kids were already using Zern well. Starting March 16th, you can see a massive change in the chart. First, you can see the one-time shock of March 16th hit all of our children in schools. No one was ready. Then follow the teal line. You can see the affluent kids recover. The teal line pops up and goes way above 0. So now affluent children are doing more math with us than they have ever done before. Now let's follow the navy blue line. This line shows what happens to low-income kids on our application. The shock hitting them is orders of magnitude greater. They recover more slowly, and they never get back to the 0 line. This is learning loss in a picture. This is what happened in our country to our most vulnerable kids in the spring of 2020. That was the spring. Now let's look at the weekly data for the fall. We started the year with high income and low income students at the 0. Again, which as I shared before is good usage. The Zern team was ecstatic and virtually high-fiving that week. On our data, it seemed like America was going to overcome the hardship of the pandemic and run school for all our kids, rich or poor. Deeper in our data, we could see the important and amazing efforts to get wireless and devices into low-income communities, an effort that is not complete. But as the fall progressed, you can see the low-income and high-income lines pull apart again. On our app data, high-income students have experienced no learning loss whatsoever for all 30 instructional weeks of the pandemic, while low-income students have experienced learning loss every single week, except perhaps one. Also, while this is the national picture, the variance by location or heterogeneity of the data is really astonishing. Here you can see how different the missed learning is by location. Each one of these bars is a state. So some states are doing well, and by doing well, I specifically mean that their low-income kids are not experiencing learning loss on our app platform. And others are doing quite poorly. You can look up your state, metro, and county on tracktherecovery.org to see what is happening in your community. This state variance data in this chart tells us two important things. The first is that learning loss for low-income kids didn't have to happen. It is a failure on the part of the adults. And the reason we know that is that there are states, metros, and counties that are not failing in this crisis. Further, because the learning loss for low-income kids is heterogeneous, we are not going to be able to prescribe one solution for every state, metro, and county. Local context will be essential to consider and plan for in the recovery. So I just shared how Zern data can show us what has happened during the pandemic in real time. Now I'll share what our data tells us we must do together to recover learning and especially math learning. The first is that we have to safely open schools for in-person learning as soon as possible. For me, the whole point of everything we do on Earth together as grown-ups is to collectively love and educate our children. And if you debate my bold assertion and have another competing purpose for what we are all doing on this planet together, you will at least acknowledge my reason on your list. The Zern data shows us that this iteration of virtual learning is not working at all, even if kids have laptops and the internet. Therefore, in many places, learning virtually School is open in name only. To orient you to this chart, we took the Zern application data and joined it to a data set provided by a company called Burbio, which provides the best national picture we have into whether schools are in person or virtual. The chart shows that classrooms of kids who are in person school are engaging with Zern as they were pre-pandemic. At the classroom level, behavior is consistent. Kids log in and do math in similar ways. The red bars show kids in virtual classrooms have 3 times or 10 times more erratic behaviors. They are not consistently logging in and progressing, and kids are doing very different things on different days. Our app data shows that the structure and accountability that schools provide are nearly non-existent in virtual settings. We can also use our app data to accelerate math learning post-pandemic. Here I have some really good news to share. Over the last decade of building Zern, supporting millions of students and conducting research, we have learned one thing. When we support learning and teaching math so it makes sense, all kids are math kids. We are not the first people to learn this. Leading researchers and the best performing countries in math achievement know this too. And that can be the premise of our recovery. What that means is math has one main plot, arithmetic to algebra, and we need to stay on that main plot. Accordingly, we have published the mathematics for kids to focus on this summer by grade level. And that can be used in any form of summer learning, from proper summer school to tutoring to a home setting. Our app data shows us that this is the most important math to start off the academic year of 2021-22 strong. Please go to our website to find our summer sequences, and let's start the recovery together, and let's make this summer count.
Thank you, Shalini, and everyone at Zern for helping to make all kids math kids. Our next speaker is Beth Hawkins. Beth is the national correspondent for the 74 and an award-winning journalist with over 30 years of storytelling experience. Education is also deeply personal for her as a mother of 2 students who went through the Minneapolis public school system. I'm also lucky to call Beth a former colleague and a friend. Please welcome Beth Hawkins.
Romy, thank you so much. I'm privileged to join you and to call you a friend. A couple of days after George Floyd was killed, I sat on the stoop of my house in Minneapolis and watched as, across the street, military trucks full of men in tactical gear swarmed the parking lot of the neighborhood garden center, forming a caravan. It was far from the only surreal thing I did that day. I'm the board chair of the charter school my daughter was on that day about to graduate from. Unrest and fires were sweeping the neighborhoods where our families live, and we were hearing that people had fled their homes, that their very, very small businesses were being reduced to cinders. We knew that some students were protesting, and we shared their pain and outrage even as we encouraged them to be off the streets by the emergency curfew. It might not have been strictly legal to open the school as a shelter, but I told our director I would take full responsibility if he did it. In the following days, we used school buses to ferry food, diapers, blankets, and other supplies. We put teachers on the buses, and no student went without numerous individual check-ins. We did it all summer. The pandemic had already worn on everyone. I get up every morning and think how depressed I am that I don't see anyone all day, our social worker told me. And then I call a student whose entire family is packed into 2 rooms and I feel like a jerk. This year, we have not seen the enrollment declines that most schools are experiencing as students, overwhelmed and disengaged, slip away. But we are tracking a new metric, the number of students, plural, in psychiatric facilities and treatment centers. In addition to my volunteer role at Venture Academy, I'm the national correspondent for the 74 Million, an education-focused news site. In that capacity, I visit a lot of schools that are focused on delivering better results for children who have been underserved for generations. My journalism has been informed by advocating for my own child who has a disability, and for her classmates, virtually all of them impoverished. As a reporter, a gatherer of facts, I can tell you that nearly 70% of school districts in a representative sample being monitored by the Center on Reinventing Public Education say they are prioritizing student well-being and social-emotional learning. But the same research found just 7% are collecting systemic data on how kids are doing and where the need is. A separate survey administered last spring by the nonprofit Youth Truth found 1 of every 2 students say depression, anxiety, and stress are barriers to virtual learning. Just 41% said they're able to motivate themselves to do their classwork. It's an unfortunate reality that our education leaders have been thrust into the position of making public health decisions. With debate over when and how schools might reopen raging on, it's unclear who's tending, in a systemic, intentional way, to the business of addressing the 1-2 punch of serving traumatized students who are also losing academic ground. We know from long experience that collecting data is one thing, using it to spur change is another. If you asked me to name one thing that I believe to be true about education in the pandemic, it's that the schools that are historically reluctant to claim their data and use it as a guide to illuminate both unmet needs and promising practices, those schools are treading water. In a lot of those places, their focus is on getting back to business as usual. But there are places, and they are not all nimble little charter schools, that when the shutdowns came, quickly played to their strengths. They poured on heaping doses of what worked in the before times. The stories I've heard about what's working right now tend to combine individual connection with good old-fashioned one-on-one academic support. I see teachers on Facebook saying they're realizing they should assign less and spend more time facilitating personal discussions of the things they do assign. The bravest are engaging students by allowing them to connect lessons to tough truths about the current moment. After George Floyd, I spoke to a teacher in New Orleans whose Black students were beyond engaged, connecting their newfound knowledge of the slave trader their school is named for to the historic roots of the inequities in their city. Near the election, I spoke to a teacher whose East African students signed up in droves to staff polls, both because they knew they were at less risk of becoming sick than the seniors who usually do the job, but also to encourage their immigrant parents and grandparents to vote. On January 7th, I spoke to a civics teacher who knew her high school students would come to school that morning asking why the police met their protests with violence, but not the Capitol insurrectionists. All of these moments are both relational and academic. These moments were made possible because those educators knew their students. They are not scared of kids' realities. They don't shy away. They use it as fuel. Here's what my little school did when the number of students absent began to spike and the number of incomplete or failed assignments jumped. They called for a break, a mentorship day. There were online games and culture-building activities, but interspersed with one-on-one catch-up sessions where an adult, teachers, administrators, even front office staff, helped students with the missing work. It was so successful they did it again the next day, and again the day after that. Over the course of 8 days, 4,000 assignments were completed and GPAs rose dramatically. Teachers felt like they were making a difference. Students saw something other than checklists of failure. Social distance encompassed social connection. We have not one, but 2 public health crises in schools. We have to treat them both. We have no more time to waste.
Thank you, Beth, for your poignant storytelling and for helping us better understand the challenges before us. I think we all agree that we can't go back to the before times. Our next speaker needs no introduction, and I'm very lucky because I got to spend a virtual minute with him right before this talk. Bishop T.D. Jakes is a powerhouse serial entrepreneur, visionary, and faith leader who presides over the Potter's House, a global humanitarian organization and 30,000 member church in Dallas. Please welcome Bishop T.D. Jakes.
Thank you, Romy, so much. I'm pleased to be a part of this forum and have an opportunity to talk not only as a pastor who has a national, some 30 million footprint in social media, but also 30,000 members in our church and have run a school and had multiple experiences in dealing with families through crisis. Being chosen to talk about the sociological and emotional needs resulting from COVID I race to the opportunity so that I can share with you from a very unique perspective some of the trauma that we are seeing on the ground as it relates to people in need. Through our TD Jakes Foundation, we have established STEM and STEAM programs, summer camps, helping to assist educators in preparing children and closing the digital divide that exists in urban communities. Quite frankly, this has been one of the most traumatic years that any of us have seen in history. But it would be remiss of us not to acknowledge the fact that disproportionately Black and brown families have succumbed to COVID. So there's an unusual amount of grief, disruption in family, sadness and sorrow added to the trauma of racial tensions and all the things that we have talked about earlier. Collectively, it goes together to create a potpourri of disaster if we do not work together to bring about a change. I suggest to you that it takes a village to raise a child, and we have to make sure that the village is well enough to help the child to recover. That village will include using unorthodox methods, in order to be able to facilitate the wholeness that our children need. It has been said that emotions are a stepping stone to cognition, that students can't learn when they're emotionally disrupted, and that the path to learning is a calm brain. We have anything but that with our children right now, the calm brain, the still waters that are necessary for us to be able to plant new ideas, innovative concepts, and ideologies that make them competitive as they enter later into the job market or prepare themselves to go to school. Some of the things that I would suggest is a plethora of ideas that extend beyond the hours of the school system. It extends to aftercare. When you look at some of the stats of recent data that has been provided to us, particularly from the American Institute of Research, it stresses the importance of after-school moments spent to reinforce the priorities to the students that are necessary to help them, and tutorial programs that will help them in school. They do not always go home to calm environments. And not only do they face disruption outwardly, but they have disruption internally that is of paramount importance that we address as we go forward. If teachers didn't already have enough on their plate, they now have the added assignment of being able to discern the difference between a child that is acting out and a child that is sending out warning signs from being traumatized in their lives. Emphasis placed on school counseling, additional training for teachers to be able to detect those warning signs appropriately, and then working together with faith leaders, community leaders, and parents, create a village whereby children are able to accomplish their goals and reach their dreams. If we do not take this on as a nation, as a society, our future will suffer from the likes of children who have been traumatized and thereby ignored or relegated into a place of dysfunction that is not appropriate. They just need therapy. They just need support. They just need love. And sometimes they simply need family. Together, I believe that we can make a difference in doing that as we integrate both online learning with physical learning, as inevitably the world is leading in that direction. We have the opportunity to engage them on many different platforms if they sense that we care and not just that they are numbers that are to be regimented. So I am encouraging us to understand the depth of the trauma. When Black parents are 3 times more likely to have died from COVID than their white counterparts, that means that your children are returning to school grieving, often raised by grandmothers who are missing, often being raised in multi-generational families, in Black and brown families where they cannot do social distancing. They have faced trauma that no child should have to see. That trauma has not been remedied while they were away from you. They will bring all of that back to school with them. And what we do with them when they come will determine what they do with us later as they become the adults and the doctors and the physicians and the engineers and the teachers of our future. Let's work together. Let's make a village and support the efforts and initiatives, not only of public schools, charter schools, but also foundations and faith leaders to provide the village that will heal the child. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Bishop Jakes, for your inspiring words and strategic vision, and for reminding all of us that the village needs to be diverse and focused. We appreciate you. Our next speaker is Dr. Valerie Bridges, who describes herself as the super proud superintendent of Edgecombe Public Schools in North Carolina. Dr. Bridges has held just about every role there is in education: teacher, AP, principal, assistant superintendent, and now superintendent. We are grateful that she is joining us today to share her wisdom and experience. Please welcome Dr. Valerie Bridges.
Good afternoon. I'm Valerie Bridges, the super proud superintendent of Edgecombe County Public Schools. I'm in my 4th year as superintendent of this wonderful district full of love and compassion for its students and its community. Our district is nestled in a small rural community about 45 minutes east of Wake County, which is in Raleigh, North Carolina. We have our fair share of struggles in our district, which include high unemployment and some academic concerns. But that's not what defines us. So what defines Edgecombe County and Edgecombe County Public Schools is its grit and its resilience. Our desire for change and continuous improvement is seen throughout our district. We have 14 schools, and among these 14 schools, we have a K-8 Spanish immersion school, which is a global school. We have a STEM elementary school. We have a STEAM elementary school. And we have a high school and middle school that have been supported by a micro school. And now that school is considered our school of innovation. In addition, we have 5 schools and principals that are going through a redesign process to assure that we can continue to do things differently in ECPS. So on March 14th, 2020, which was a Saturday, our governor enacted school closure for all schools due to COVID. On March 15th, 2020, which is a Sunday, we acted swiftly to begin the process of virtual learning and being able to provide a plethora of needs to our students and the community. Some of those needs included, of course, feeding, breakfast and lunch for students, devices, Chromebooks, hotspots, social emotional, and several other services that we recognized that we needed to help students and families with. We really leaned into our strategic plan, which embraces strongly supporting the whole child, equity, academic excellence, purposeful partnerships, while also acknowledging that we must remain resilient and have a resilient foundation. So as a school system, we really had to deal with a crisis, a pandemic, while also holding true to our beliefs as educators and leaders and exemplifying the tenets of an ambidextrous organization. So we had to be focused on the day-to-day operations to make sure that students in our community still receive those day-in, day-out things that they needed, while also focusing and working to secure our children's future. So we had to think about today and we had to think about tomorrow. We are determined to dream with and sometimes for our scholars. We want our students to live out their passions and their dreams. So really one early initiative, even during COVID, was learning pods. We learned about them while watching television and seeing other districts, some of them affluent districts, put together learning pods for their students. Our students who didn't have access to internet, those are the students that we wanted to reach, and we wanted to reach them quickly. So we piloted it at an elementary and a middle school. Both of those settings look very different, but they had the same why. We wanted to provide a safe place for kids to work and engage, a safe place for them to get additional support and have access to reliable internet where their parents worked. So we'd like to say a special thank you to the Walton Family Foundation because we applied for grants that would support and build out some of our learning pilots and our learning pods. We also had an opportunity to support our North Phillips School of Innovation and to continue to make sure that we provided support for students and reimagined learning. Some of the funding was used to have experiences such as advisory and design for change and passion projects. During these projects, we also built a coalition of supporters within our community. Additional funding was used for our learning pods at Phillips and at North, and to just keep us moving in the right direction. This spring, we'll be using some Learning Hubs Innovation Grant for our middle and high schools. They will host at least one pod. Off campus at some places will be apartment complex or local libraries. Next fall, we'll also pilot 3 learning hubs, and they'll include some learning pods that just are based on interest and a student's desire, and sometimes things that they can't have access to in their own community. We want to bring that to them and make sure that we support them. So throughout a pandemic, we've again continued to reimagine, innovate, and provide for our students the things not only that they need, but also that they want. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bridges and team, for putting innovation into practice and for your commitment to students and their achievement. Really remarkable. Our next speaker is Reihan Salam. Reihan is the visionary president of the Manhattan Institute, a think tank whose mission is to develop and disseminate new ideas that foster greater economic choice and individual responsibility. He is a contributing editor at The Atlantic, National Affairs, and National Review, and a prolific writer and speaker on topics of great importance to civil society. Please welcome Reihan Salam.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. When we're looking at the urgent, pressing, desperate need for more educational pluralism in the country, the obstacle hasn't been creative thinking from the policy community. The obstacle hasn't been deep commitment on the part of parents and activists and funders. The obstacle has been our inability to build a durable coalition that can be effective, that can actually achieve policy change at the legislative level. And there are a number of reasons that's true. In an age of nationalized politics, this is a state and local issue. If you're a political entrepreneur at the national level, what you found is that attempts to nationalize the issue of fostering educational pluralism have met with nationalized resistance. We need to be champions of community-led, community-demanded change. And that means a lot more patience. That means a lot more focus at a level of politics that tends to get ignored in the national press. Otherwise, you're going to be met with nationalized pushback. Another big obstacle has been the fact that the biggest beneficiaries of greater educational pluralism and choice have been low-income urban parents. This is a group that is incredibly important for the future of our country, the future of our workforce, of all of our civic institutions. But to be blunt, this is a group that does not, in the here and now, have much political power and voice. So if we want to build an effective, diverse, and durable coalition, we need to break out of this pattern. We need to find ways to be much more effective at that community level, at the state and local level. So the first thing we need to confront is the fact that mass public opinion doesn't matter as much as we'd like. I say as we'd like because choice policies in the abstract are really, really popular. If you look at the EdChoice surveys, for example, what you'll find is not just majority support for vouchers, tax credit scholarships, and education savings accounts. What you'll find is super majority support that's actually been building over time, including over just the last few months. However, the opposition is very formidable, organized, and concentrated. We're familiar with the fact that many teachers' unions are very opposed to anything that's going to undermine the position of district schools. There are a lot of reasons that's true. There are, I believe, ways to win over some unionized teachers, but that happens to be a fact of the larger political environment. It's important to remember, however, that the power of unionized teachers has been undergirded by many parents, particularly affluent suburban parents. And one big reason for this is that those suburban district schools are not just schools. They're not just places where people's kids get educated. They are a massive source of community-specific social capital. They make people much more effective in civic life by giving them a locus for their organizing. It is really important if we're going to build an effective, diverse, and durable coalition for policy change to bring more of those suburban parents into that coalition. Now, when you talk about bringing suburban parents, professional parents, more affluent parents into the coalition for choice, one concern is always, what does this mean for equity? Does this mean there's going to be less of a focus on those struggling parents, on low-income parents? And what I want to suggest is that that's not necessarily the case. This is not just about self-interest. It's also about getting many better off parents to understand, to empathize with the struggles of other parents. And I believe that the pandemic has actually done a lot of good in that sense. It's created the potential for new solidarities that go beyond geography. Those suburban districts create community for suburban parents, but new alternatives can create the same kind of solidarity for parents that are united by other considerations that transcend color, class, and geography. So then the question becomes, how exactly do you bring those suburban parents into the coalition? And here's an area where it's really important to remember that you can't beat something with nothing. When you're talking about choice, when you're talking about new schools in an urban context where charter schools have really become a part of the landscape, where they're no longer some scary boogeyman, but they're a reality that parents see, parents like, parents embrace, you have a very, very different political context. So it is really imperative that we start creating alternatives that reach into the suburbs. In some cases, particularly in inner suburbs and more dense communities, that could mean bringing high-performing charter networks into those communities. But it also is going to mean finding new ways to support hybrid homeschooling. It's going to mean bringing new options into the classroom so that parents have more options within their district schools. It's creating a wide range of different proof points where activists, parents, teachers, and funders are thinking creatively about making pluralism a reality for those parents, and then building on those kind of entry points in order to change how people conceive of the larger educational landscape. This is an area where we need to devote a lot more time and attention to creating new alternatives, to demonstrating that they can exist and they're not just something for urban school districts. Once you do that, once you create that cadre of satisfied parents, even if it's a minority of public school parents, that is going to make change much more tractable. And that's going to be the kind of change that is cumulative, that builds over time. So overall, I'd say that I'm optimistic about the prospects. I think that you're seeing people who are recognizing that district schools, that residential assignment, that brick and mortar schools aren't the end all be all, and that we need to start thinking beyond them, and that some creative institutions have succeeded in thinking beyond them. And that is going to allow us to build a more formidable cross-class coalition.
Thank you so much, Reihan, for your insights and for reminding us that new coalitions will take patience and energy to forge, but are really of the utmost importance for educational equity. Our final speaker today is Stacy Childress. Stacy is a transformative education innovator who now serves as CEO of New Schools Venture Fund. So many of us have had the privilege to learn from Stacy over the years, myself included. Please welcome Stacy Childress.
Every student is a powerful learner. Their learning experiences should prepare and inspire them to create good lives for themselves in young adulthood, to make positive change in their communities, to build a more equitable future for everyone. And whether they're in classrooms or at home or in community spaces, students should have access, seamless access to high quality materials and instruction, to learning experiences that support their social and emotional and academic development. And this should be true for every student, regardless of the color of their skin, how much money their parents make, or what neighborhood they happen to live in. Right now, our education system and the schools within it are struggling to meet this aspiration. And the pandemic amplified just how far we are from this vision of learning. When nearly every school in America shut down in March of 2020, The transition to distance learning was jarring for families and for educators. From basic infrastructure like devices and access to the internet, to instructional approaches and tools that could help students continue their learning, parents and teachers simply did not have the knowledge or the resources they needed to respond effectively to the crisis. The projected levels of learning loss are potentially devastating, especially for our most underserved students. And this is on top of already really challenging results. For instance, on the 2019 National Assessment of Educational Progress, results actually declined since 2017. For 8th graders, only 34% were reading or doing math at proficient levels. At the same time, we're in the midst of a national reckoning with racial equity and justice. And it once again has laid bare the systemic barriers that stymie progress in too many communities. Barriers that have blocked students of color, especially Black students, from receiving learning experiences that honor their full humanity and prepare them effectively for long-term success. These factors come together to create a moment to really rethink how learning happens from our youngest children to our young adults. And if we're really going to reimagine learning, we need the best ideas from everyone. The good news is diverse leaders, innovators, educators around the country have bold ideas for tackling this moment. The genius that we need to reimagine, to create an education system that is both more effective and more equitable already exists in this nation. It's in our communities. People in communities that have a deep understanding of their context and of the possibilities for change, supported with lessons learned from multiple domains, and provided with the resources and the space and the grace they need to bring their great ideas to life. If we work on the same problems at the same time, but in different ways, we're more likely to create multiple solutions that can work in multiple contexts, in multiple communities, rather than trying to cajole people to adopt the one best way that might be the preference of policymakers or funders. And to create the kind of innovation we're talking about, to have a more supportive landscape for that innovation, we can take 4 key actions. So first, we can connect families and educators and researchers and policymakers together and provide them with what the best is that we know of today as they try to work on solutions that really meet the moment and help think about what can be possible in the future. Second, we can lower the barriers for this kind of innovations that are created by policies that act as compliance mechanisms that hold in place existing arrangements and approaches that do not work for children and young people, do not work for families. Third, we can create new kinds of coalitions for change, ones that really make the most of the richness and the power of our diversity across multiple dimensions to work on common solutions to common problems. And fourth, we can provide this new generation of innovators with the kind of support they need to really bring their best ideas to life, to create the space that they need to work on their early ideas, to iterate on their early insights, and have the potential to create more durable solutions that have the potential to re-inspire all of us about what's possible. And they need capital aligned with those objectives. My colleague, Frances Massano, president of the New Schools Venture Fund, calls this dream capital. Dream capital is big enough and patient enough to help these innovators bring their solutions to life. It's different from smaller, shorter term, more restricted capital that sometimes can turn even the biggest aspirations into more incremental goals that end up running out of fuel before they're ready for liftoff. The time to rethink how learning works has never been more urgent. Unleashing the genius that already exists in this country, in our communities, to do just that is the way to approach the moment that we're in and to imagine a new future, a new set of possibilities for our young people. We can do this together. Let's get to work.
Thank you, Stacy, for that call to action as we create a better future for students together. And thank you so much to all of our speakers today. The creativity and thoughtfulness that each of you brings to your work is inspiring to all of us, and we are very, very grateful for it. We are excited for the work over the next 5 years and grateful for all our current and future partners for the work that you do every day. We join your commitment to developing new solutions to advance student learning and success and appreciate that it won't be easy, but that it has to happen. We promise to support you with the humility, compassion, and heart that we've seen in every corner of this country. Thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to engaging with you, to continuing to listen and learn alongside you. Thank you so much.